he is going to best Joe Biden because Joe Biden's been a disaster on the border, which we see every day, on crime, which we see in our inner cities, and on the economy.
But
So I
if he's
think,
really concerned about this issue of immigration and strengthening that border, why are Republicans in the House holding up this bill that would strengthen some of the security measures along that border?
oh, I hope you're not talking about the budget, the so-called compromise bill that James Lankford proposed.
Well,
Uh,
there's a big package, isn't there?
that
There's a
wouldn't
big package.
strengthen any border measures.
Well,
That would,
well, there's
in
a
fact,
big package of funding, isn't there? There's a package of funding for Ukraine and Israel, and it's being tied up by Republicans in the House of Representatives with the funding to boost security along the border.
yeah, and no, that's an incorrect statement. You're framing the bill as a bill to increase security around the border, and that's not what that bill does.
Hey, Matt Rinaldi, thank you so much for joining us. We are now recording. First of all, we've had this ruling from the US Supreme Court today, essentially overruling the court in Colorado. What's your reaction to that?
I mean, it was the obvious ruling legally that states can't one by one and piecemeal rig the presidential ballot by taking presidential candidates off of the ballot. Instead, the Supreme Court unanimously sent it to voters. And that was the right ruling. But I guess what's even a bigger takeaway from it is the amount of legal scholars and political pundits on the left that even raised any question about that. I mean, 9-0 with Ketanji Jackson even saying no. Donald Trump has the ability to be on the ballot. It was a resounding ruling, and it was the proper one.
But the reason that the Colorado court said that he should be kept off the ballot paper is because of his role in that riot at the Capitol building. I mean, surely there are questions there about whether he's trying to overturn democracy.
Well, what the court said was who decides whether or not they met the criteria set forth in the Constitution. And they said it was Congress that sets forth the standard for being removed from a presidential ballot. And of course, you can see the converse of that, right? Where red states like Texas would remove Joe Biden from the ballot because his open border policy is a threat to democracy and an insurrection. And what the court said is, we don't want that. We want people to be able to vote, and who they vote for should be the president.
So Donald Trump's going to be on the ballot paper. It's Super Tuesday tomorrow. How important is that?
It's very important in that not in the presidential ballot. It's a 70%. He'll get 70% of the vote here in Texas. What's very important is the lower primaries here in the state of Texas.
So that is some of the other candidates for the Senate and the House of Representatives that will also be decided tomorrow.
Correct. All of our statewide offices are currently on the ballot, and there's some pretty heavily contested primaries that Donald Trump has weighed into. For example, our Speaker of the House, Dade Phelan, and some other statewide races as well.
Do you think that tomorrow will be the day that Nikki Haley gives up her attempt to challenge Donald Trump for the Republican nomination?
Oh, I don't think she'll ever give up. I think she'll still be campaigning when Donald Trump takes the oath of office in January.
Why do you say that?
Well, I say that because it's been inevitable that she was not going to be the nominee for months now, yet she's still persisted on. And there doesn't seem to be any end game for her, and there doesn't seem to be any purpose for her being in the race right now. And that isn't going to change after Super Tuesday. She will still not be the president.
Well, she still has a lot of donors backing her. She has won the Washington, D.C. Contest. She has won a significant chunk of the Republican vote in, for example, South Carolina. I know that's her home state. I know that because of the way the winner-takes-all system works, she didn't necessarily get much momentum from that. But doesn't that show that a significant chunk of the Republican Party don't want Donald Trump as the candidate?
Well, no, other than in the District of Columbia, where you have career bureaucrats who are in the federal government who I definitely think would support Nikki Haley. That's her core constituency in Washington, D.C. by government workers. But, among what America really is here in Texas, here in the Midwest and South Carolina and other areas, they rejected her overwhelmingly, even in her home state. Yes, donors are still donating to her because they hope that in open primary states like on Super Tuesday, she's going to draw Democrats to the polls to vote for her. I don't think a lot of Democrats will come along, but I think that's their hope, that they can swing some of these lower level races with increased Democrat votes and keep the more conservative candidates off the ballot.
So after Super Tuesday, it's going to be clearer than ever that we're heading for a rematch, Donald Trump against Joe Biden. Now, Donald Trump does appear to be ahead in the polls. Do you think that, given everything he's up against, a whole chunk of other legal challenges that he is still facing, the fact that, as we've just said, some in the Republican Party don't want Donald Trump to be their candidate, do you think that he really can win another term in the White House?
Well, sure, I do. The presidency of Joe Biden has been an absolute disaster. Joe Biden is actually less popular at this point in his presidency than Jimmy Carter was at this point in his presidency. He's one of the most unpopular presidents that we've ever had. And yeah, I think he's vulnerable to anyone right now, certainly. And Donald Trump is picking up steam. People are seeing him for what he is. He's right smack dab in the political mainstream of the United States. When you get past the tweets and everything else, he is the most mainstream candidate in the presidential race, and voters will vote that way in November.
What do you think are going to be the big issues when it comes to this presidential race? What is it that Donald Trump is going to campaign on that will mean that he can actually win over voters that he didn't get last time around? Because he needs to do that, doesn't he, if he's going to defeat Joe Biden?
Well, presumably, or if people who voted for Joe Biden are very unhappy with what they got, because Joe Biden campaigned on as a unifier, and what we've seen out of him so far is these dark facades, like in front of Independence Hall, basked in red light and vilifying his opponents. What Donald Trump's going to campaign on is going to be crime, the border, and the economy. And on each of those issues, he is going to best Joe Biden, because Joe Biden's been a disaster on the border, which we see every day, on crime, which we see in our inner cities, and on the economy.
But
So
if
I think,
he's really concerned about this issue of immigration and strengthening that border, why are Republicans in the House holding up this bill that would strengthen some of the security measures along that border?
oh, I hope you're not talking about the budget, the so-called compromise bill that James Lankford proposed.
Well,
Um,
there's a big package, isn't there?
that
There's a
wouldn't
big
strengthen any border measures.
well,
That would,
well, there's a
in
big
fact,
package of funding, isn't there? There's a package of funding for Ukraine and Israel, and it's being tied up by Republicans in the House of Representatives with the funding to boost security along the border.
yeah, and no, that's an incorrect statement. You're framing the bill as a bill to increase security around the border, and that's not what that bill does. In fact, it codifies catch and release. It codifies all of the policies that Biden has been implementing, which have led to this border disaster, and it would make the border disaster worse. If you want to see a border bill that would work, go look at Congressman Chip Roy's bill in the House. That's the bill we should be passing, not the one that makes it worse.
If Donald Trump does win another term in the White House, what do you think his relations are going to be with the UK and indeed with other NATO allies? A lot of people in the UK were very concerned about those comments he made when he seemed to suggest that he wouldn't necessarily come to the support of a NATO ally if it hadn't spent enough money on its own defense.
Well, I think that was Donald Trump's way of saying that Europe needs to carry its fair share of NATO. I think he's demonstrated by his foreign policy record that we have a more stable world and a more stable foreign policy with him as president than we do now with Joe Biden as president.
Just finally, who do you think Donald Trump's going to pick as his running mate? There's been a whole host of names, but the most recent one is Greg Abbott, who is your governor there in Texas. Could he be the next vice president?
I think he could be. And you know what? I think it would be a great pick if Donald Trump picks him and if Governor Abbott wants to serve. He's had a tremendous term. He stood up to the Biden administration on the border. He's pushed school choice, which is a very important issue here in Texas, to Republicans. I think he's had a fantastic third term, and I think he would make a great vice president.
Matt Rinaldi, great to speak to you. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Appreciate it.